And I said, I don't think it works that way. I think you need some advanced degrees first. You don't even know where the whiteboard is. But he said I was getting hung up on semantics, and he said that Professor Hyacinth had a nice ring to it, which I couldn't deny. So I said, listen, I'll call you professor if you pick up the bar tab. And he said he would do that, and that's how the debate ended. To no one's surprise, Rob turned out to have a wonderful gift for teaching. He was thorough and patient and able to communicate his great love for journalism in every class he taught. His students loved him, his fellow teachers loved him, administrators loved him. So clearly he had expanded his cult once more. But what an important service Rob was performing, right? In this day when journalism is under such constant assault, when the hostility towards the men and women who work in newsrooms has never been higher, when these ridiculous charges of fake news are hurled by the most powerful politicians we have in this country, Rob was telling these young people at College Park, hey, we need you out there. We need you reporting the facts, and we need you telling the truth. So that's how I'm going to remember my great friend, Rob Hyacinth. I don't want to remember that a madman filled with hate and rage walked into a newsroom with a shotgun and ended his life and the lives of 5 other innocent people. I want to just remember what a wonderful person Rob was and what a great, wonderful, selfless life he led. Thanks a lot.
Good evening. My name is Paul Stiff. I am honored to share loving memories of Rob. Many of these are shared experiences with closest friends, and others are from Rob and my lifelong friendship. Please know that there is an overstocked vault with Rob, as he touched so many lives. I think everyone here knows that, including my wife Roma, who's here joining me today, Rob's closest friends, Jerry, Carcello, and Dave Stahl, who are also present tonight, who are friends of Rob's from childhood as well. I first met Rob at Peters Elementary in Plantation, Florida in the 4th grade. While we were not immediate friends, Rob was likable, treated me kindly, and always politely and said hello. And while saying hello sometimes is difficult to do, Rob always took the time to do it. We were not in the same class together initially, but everyone knew Rob. He was that tall, lanky, good-mannered kid with beautiful blonde, flowing hair and engaging style. As 7th grade rolled around, a couple years later, we were off at Plantation Middle School, and we were together in class for the first time. There, 2 awkward kids somehow befriended one another. While it is hard to recall exactly the time that we started really hanging out, I knew that this was a guy I wanted to be around. We played ping pong, handball, threw the football, and shot hoops. I quickly discovered Rob was entertaining, intriguing, and had an awesome personality. I loved his sense of humor, his wit. He had a vocabulary at the time, even of a college student. But I also fell in love with his sensitivity, something 7th graders generally do not have. Rob had deeper intellect than anyone that I had ever encountered. His early writing skill and usage of the language was uncanny, even at 7th grade. He was easy to be around and made comfort for all. While enjoying sports, he also embraced reading and class studies. Pretty odd from where I came from and in our community. He could deeply and effectively manage the pressures of childhood. He could be the best player in the game and then also diffuse the disputes of the moment on the court. In essence, he was a player and a referee all at the same time. Our relationship really emerged in our English class under the tutelage of Miss Rubeck. Now, Miss Rubeck was tough. She was a no-nonsense teacher. Rob and I bonded over the discomfort of her intimidating style. One day, Miss Rubeck required that we read the Book of Johnny Tremaine, a fictional novel set in Boston during the American Revolution. She would test our knowledge in short order. As such, Rob went home, read the book from start to finish, I think in about 2 days. I couldn't get past the first chapter. The content really bored me to tears. When the test day came the next day, I sat in my usual seat next to my new buddy. Rob flew through all the answers and was the first in the class to complete the assignment. And I was still stuck on the first page. At that moment, I worked hard to see if I could take a little look over at Rob's paper and cheat off of that knowledge. Miss Rubeck caught me cheating immediately. She berated me. She made me publicly cry. And while Rob could have laughed with all the other kids that were in the room, he took the high road and he comforted me. And then after school, Rob grabbed me by the shoulder. And he said, "Let's go." And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Let's get on that bike and go." So we rode my bike. Rob didn't have a bike that day. He actually walked to school. Yeah, they did that back then. And we were doing an exercise of what we call towing, where you have one guy on the front of the bike and the other guy is driving. Well, Rob always wanted to be the driver. So I would be sitting up on the top of those handlebars. And we created a location midway home called Dead Man's Curve, which is where we often wiped out into these groups of bushes and get all scraped up and all beat up from the events. Rob and I were starting at that moment, I think, really what was becoming a very deep bond and one that I knew would last a lifetime. But we were also expanding relationships in school with others. Rob had his friends, and I had mine. By high school, the small group of 6 became known as the Army. 2 of those gentlemen are here with me today. This group was built from the coolest kids in school. All of them intelligent, athletic, and bringing something special to one another. Rob was the centerpiece of that group. Pickup games, impromptu sports, they brought us all together. It helped extend a broader friendships for all of us. Endless days and nights of backyard baseball, street football, board games, wrestling, baseball, basketball ensued, and Jerry's front yard actually became the epicenter of all our activities. Rob was always a huge presence there. Things were simply better when he was around. After games, one team would boast and the other would claim that they were cheated. And we would go up to the Utotem convenience store around the corner and drink cold drinks and hang out up front. And really, those became the greatest days of our youth. We also golfed occasionally, where Rob would really embellish the rules quite a bit by teeing the ball up in the fairway or in the sand trap. His friends laughed at him, but we loved his ingenuity. He always insisted on driving the cart, just like the bicycle. He loved to scare the crap out of me by getting as close to the trees as he possibly could and making quick or sharp turns to avoid disaster. Once, his driving skills evaded him at Plantation Country Club, the neighborhood club. Rob nailed a massive tree branch to rip the entire roof right off the golf cart. It was dangling by a thread, and Rob tried to reassemble it only to really cut his hand horribly bad. He was bleeding everywhere. After the round, he dropped the cart off at the clubhouse, claiming it was as good as new. Drove wonderful. And I'm not kidding, it was actually hanging by a thread. But Rob was so persuasive with the clubhouse clerk that guy believed every word that Rob said. You see, Rob could get us out of any jam. We played turkey bowls, impromptu wars of tackle, not touch football. Team selections were occasionally defined, but Rob was a versatile player that everybody wanted. He was the best defensive end, had great hands of a tight end, and could block. One splendid year in Florida in the rain and mud, Rob became Jim Brown, Earl Campbell, and Walter Payton wrapped into one. The ball was too wet to throw effectively, so our team captain, Dave, called on Rob to run the football play after play. He was in a zone, and Dave knew it. So Dave kept feeding him that ball. Rob scored over and over and over again, and he was the MVP of that game. And years later, Rob actually wrote about that, I believe, in the Sun. And our friends marvel to this day at the writing that Rob made. To his friends, Rob was Robbie, Bob, Big Bob, and my favorite, High Steps. That was his basketball nickname. He was athletic, a coach of logic on the field, thought-provoking, impressionable, articulate. He was Don Shula and Vince Lombardi wrapped into one. He specialized in high school basketball, had an amazing hook shot, and he used his wingspan to swat away any shots near the basket. And when Rob rebounded the ball, get out of the way. He kept everybody at bay. He had the meanest elbows in school. Back in class, Rob was a leader involved in his school. He was in student council. He was honored for school and community projects. He participated in intramurals and much, much more. And he loved English. It seemed odd to us, again, but it was beautiful. He was enormously popular to be around. The girls loved his charm. The guys admired his style. To me, he was very distinctive and amazingly balanced. While our group of friends would all be together nonstop, Rob would measure his time between getting together with us and building broader relationships and skills. He found time to be with family, reflect and study alone, cultivate new interests, and create broader friendships. He coached youth basketball. He took to music. He wanted to learn the drums and the saxophone. He volunteered, as Kevin noted earlier, to be in the Big Brothers program, and he mentored from a very early age Michael Irvin, a Hall of Fame NFL player from the Dallas Cowboys. And actually, I recall one time Rob inviting me to throw the ball together with this young kid. We at the time, of course, never knew he'd be a Hall of Fame football player. As graduation time came and approaches for leaving for college were starting, our group was splintering in different places, but Rob and I stayed together. We went off to Florida Southern College in Lakeland. We chose to room together in a freshman dorm, and we had bunk beds that were in a room that was about the size of a shoebox. A little tough for a guy like Rob. Rob and I spent many days together, from playing horse and tennis to eating meals together to playing darts and pool and shuffleboard in a neighborhood bar. We went out on Halloween as adults, actually, to go get candy. We invented new games, a game called Whiplash, a bizarre board game that required only 2 number 2 pencils and a piece of typing paper that Rob always had around. Our competitions were fierce, each accusing each other of bending the rules. And later in life, Rob and I actually would still play the game. As a matter of fact, the other night, I found a letter from Rob from 2012 where we were still actually sending back and forth in the U.S. mail this game of Whiplash. Some of these would actually take months to complete, but we faithfully continued to play. We were only together for 1 semester at Florida Southern as Rob needed a more challenging educational experience. He went home for the semester, and then he made his way north up to the University of Florida. It was there that he honed his writing skills. And I loved writing to him so much because he would inspire me with the words that he would send back to me. After graduations, we decided to move back in together in Orlando after he did a short stint in Sarasota in radio. We shared 2 different apartments at that time in Orlando, and they were some of our best days together. We would head off to our jobs, Rob in radio, and I was in advertising. We thought we had it all: a car, a simple apartment, some chairs, a card table for dining and playing cards, a TV, a music system, and we had what was known as Saturday night steak night, where we would actually grill on a hibachi steak. We would play music for hours, singing nonstop, lining record jackets on the floor, reciting lyrics, and looking forward to weekends. We played one-on-one football, which is kind of tough to do, but we did it in a parking lot between cars. We went to the beach. We took in a concert. We went to the movies. We watched skits of Saturday Night Live and drank many, many beers. We loved impromptu explorations, and we went undercover, as Rob would call it. It's a hole-in-the-wall bars where he could get a lot of his inspiration. We would debate for hours, days, and years about top 10 lists from various artists. We generally loved the same material. Rob loved music that had purpose, with lyrics that drove deep meaning. As you heard, James Taylor, the Rolling Stones, Chicago, Bob Dylan, and of course the Beatles. Rob even liked a few country songs, which seriously made us laugh. While I ran off to Texas to pursue my craft, Rob had greater vision for building his. He was working in radio, and yeah, he had that voice for radio too. He moved from Florida to Raleigh to pursue his fascination for news and reporting. He called me one day after settling in and told me he had found love. Not soon after, I knew that Rob was really not joking about this. He had found his Maria. The wedding day would be in June. And Rob asked me if I would be his best man in the wedding. It was one of the greatest moments, honestly, that I've ever had in my life. Rob and Maria had a spectacular wedding in North Carolina. Rob's transition into feature writing was something to behold from where I saw it. I followed his writing and his reporting in awe, day after day after day after day. He was my inspiration for use of our language. He needed few words to paint pictures while I needed thousands. And he created emotion for his audiences. Years passed as Rob and Maria took time to settle in Maryland, but Rob and I were always in touch. Children were arriving, jobs were evolving, time was flying by. Then came time for my wedding, and naturally, Rob was my best man. The night before my wedding, Rob and I stayed in the same hotel room. We talked and laughed till 5 a.m. in the morning. I was so nervous, but Rob was as cool as a cucumber. His speech at my wedding was poetry and impromptu, and it brought tears to everybody. His command of the moment was truly inspiring. As time moved on, we did not get together too often. Something we both talked about often, and as really was our only one regret. But we communicated often, via text, phone calls, through silly messages that we would leave for one another. See, we never drifted. He was always there for me, and I was always there for him. We talked about events of the month, our waistlines, expanding, sports, food, music, travel, so much more. We talked about what it was like to be a husband and a father. We agreed it was the greatest gift of life. And he wanted you to know that. For our relationships, we had one main purpose more than any: laughter. We would mimic countless impersonations. We used our childhood together to paint memorable conversations about people who influenced us, from the obscure to the famous to broadcasters to even our close friends. We embellished, we reflected and clowned, all for simple laughter. We would always burst out from the creativity of the calls, from the reporting, which was our favorite, of the Masters golf tournament with the British accents, to being sent to detention in high school for some innocent gaffe. You see, Rob and I had a level of communication on a different playing field. One like I can never really accurately define, nor would many really even understand. It was silly, spiritual, and playful. It was impromptu and even confusing at times. Rob was a master orator, and his quick wit was dazzling. I kidded him often that his talent should be served for negotiating peace talks or something even broader. Rob was my soul. He gave me my strength. He gave me inspiration. He always had a calming presence during my toughest hours. The death of my brother, my son's near fatal illness, and even my wife's battle with breast cancer. He was always there to bring me to a place of peace. That's the kind of friend Rob is and always will be. On Friday, June 22nd, Rob sent me an email to thank me for being the best man in his wedding, which he was celebrating 33 years ago to the day. He was so proud. He was in the moment. He said that I was the best man then and still was today. This overcame me, so I emailed him back. I told him that we would always have that moment together of being each other's best man. 2 hours later, while driving home from Austin to Dallas, I knew we had to talk. The conversation was fun and peppered with love. We laughed till it hurt. He was off to his anniversary dinner with Maria, and I reminded him he needed to make sure he picked up the cold duck and got it cold in the refrigerator. That was a little joke back then from our childhood. He was in a great place at that time, that moment. He was so happy with his bride, prideful of his children, loving the mentoring he was doing at work. He was content. He was filled with love and gratitude. This past Saturday, an old friend asked me for a quick reflection about Rob from high school. I told him it was too complex to explain. Rob's character was too kind, too honest, humane, charming, compassionate, and gentle to really even define. But he pushed me for more, and I came up with this. Rob had the most gifted ability to create a transformation of moods. Talking to Rob produced immediate calmness, spirit, and well-being. Rob, you see, was defined by artistry. I admired every fiber of this gentle giant. An encounter with Rob was to feel the heartbeat and the grace of God. I believe that. We are blessed to have shared so much together and will always love this remarkable man. I'll miss you, High Steps, and look forward to our days together again. I love you.
Hi. Rob was my little brother. My name is Judy. About 2 years ago, our mom passed away, and I spoke briefly at her funeral. Afterwards, I was very hard on myself, and I felt I hadn't honored her properly, and I hadn't said all that I should have or I had wanted to say. So, as I had done countless times in the past, I called Rob to share my feelings and my regrets and my second guesses. And it's always, Rob was very honest. And he said, "You said all of it just right. You were majestic." And with just the precisely right word, he made me feel better. That's how it was with Rob and me. He was my baby brother. But I felt that I could share things with him that I could share with no one else. And I'd like to think he felt the same way. In our adult years, we were closer and closer in confidence. He was like our dad in a lot of ways. He was a wonderful listener and also the master of the subtle yet perfect wry quip. But he could be steely and stubborn. Now, Paul has mentioned with Rob's hair. Rob was always a little vain about his hair. And I do remember when he was in middle school and my father couldn't stand the hair and he ordered my mother to take Rob to the barbershop. And Rob, got in the car. He didn't have a lot to say. She pulled into the barbershop, and he refused to get out of the car. Passive aggressive. There was nothing she could do except turn that car around and wait for my father's wrath. And Rob could lie. Oh, yes. In high school, he stole my locked diary. He broke the lock and he read it. And then he put it back. You may have read it too. I don't know, Paul. He denied this for years. Years. And finally he confessed and said how disappointed he was because there was nothing juicy in it. And there was very little mention made of him. Another story where he lied. He used his toothbrush, my toothbrush, to clean his bowling ball. No, seriously, I came home and my toothbrush was black. And it took a while. I figured it out. He denied it. He denied it. And finally I looked at him and I said, why did you even return it? You could have just taken it. But, you know, Rob lied. And I know for a fact that my James Taylor albums and the bootleg version that I got in 1973 when I was in college in North Carolina, and I found this bootleg version, I know for a fact they are in your basement. And he lied about it. Rob and I both love James Taylor, and hence the pilfering of my albums. And we would argue over which song was the better written song. I, of course, opted for anything that was on the top chart, and Rob would thoughtfully decide on something a little less popular and dissecting every single nuance. And the years would go by, and he and I would compare James Taylor concerts, because invariably he would have seen the same concert I had, just on a different leg of the trip. And that wasn't the only music that he enjoyed. In 1976, 2 months after our dad died very suddenly, Rob was in high school, and I was at the University of Florida at that time, and he got on a bus. And he took the bus up, and because I had tickets for Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Tour with Joan Baez and the band. And we laughed, and we danced, and we cried. Also, Rob was Mom's favorite. I always teased him about this, and he gleefully took pride in that role, egging it all on. One year I picked him up at the airport maybe 10 so years ago, and I stood outside, and I had a sign that said, Mr. Special. And he got off that plane and loved it. He was Mr. Special the entire visit. He loved it. He loved that attention. A few years ago, he came down to visit our mom, who was not in good health. And we would always laugh, and I would say to Mom, I said, stop, Rob's being a pain, and without missing a beat, without a second's hesitation, she didn't even look up, she said, stop provoking your brother. And he was the favorite. Rob was everyone's favorite. So here we are. I do not feel majestic, but I look at his magnificent children and his nieces and his nephews and his amazing true love, Maria, and all of his extended family. And all I see and all I feel is big Rob love. I would say to Rob, it's not your birthdays, my birthdays, that bother me. It's yours. And so now, my dear, beautiful baby brother, there are no more birthdays. But may you build a ladder to the sky and climb on every rung, and may you stay forever young. Thank you.
I am Carl. I am Rob's little brother. I'm 6 years older, but he wasn't always Big Rob, and I never had the honor or privilege of working with him in a newsroom. We were in the same business, and we talked often and shared our mutual love for editors from a distance, but I never got to work with him. So what I thought I could talk about was growing up with him a little bit, because if he were talking in my ear right now, he'd say, make the people laugh if you can. So I'm going to tell some stories. I'm going to bring the level of conversation down a little bit with some of the stories. Rob, as Paul pointed out, was and Judy also, was a seamless prevaricator when he wanted to be, when it suited him. And Judy mentioned already the album situation in our house. I was 6 years older than Rob, and he coveted more than anything else my album collection, and also he waited for the day when I was going to go off to college and he was going to occupy that bedroom down the hall. But he couldn't wait, and I had every time I came into my room, there was shit missing, and I knew where it was. And I would confront him, and as Judy described and Paul described, he would look at, he had the most wonderful way of looking at you and denying something, and then you okay, that sounds plausible. But in my case, I had not yet discovered James Taylor, and in fact, his first album hadn't even come out. This was late 60s. And Rob knew that my collection, in particular of the Rolling Stones albums, drove my mother, a strict Catholic, up the wall, and that we weren't allowed to play the songs very loud on our own turntables. But my mother had said, whatever you do, do not play that album for your little brother. Do not. So of course Rob listened at the door, and he fell in love with the Rolling Stones. And I would come home from wherever I had been and put an album on, and there would be scratch marks on it. It would be, and I knew there wasn't. I just listened to the album the night before, and I would go in and I would confront Rob, and I would hold the album. He'd say, "I don't know what you're talking about. I've never would do that. I didn't play your records." So, and he had that quality, as all of you who knew him were aware. He had that quality of looking in your eye, and you just, okay, well, he's right. And then, of course, the day comes when I get home early from school or something, and there I can hear coming out of his bedroom the Rolling Stones. I don't know, Brown Sugar, something is playing on this, and I'm going, well, that's my album. And I burst in, and there Rob and he has a turntable, and he's playing one of my albums. It's one of my albums. And I said, why did you steal my album? And he just looked at me and said, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? Judy and my sister Barb will remember. Well, maybe they were. I don't know if they were old enough. But when Rob, when he was very young, when he was a baby, he got pneumonia, and we were little. And first of all, we didn't plan on. I'm not sure my dad even planned on having. There was a gap, and then there was Rob, and he was. He came out. He was big when he hit the ground, and he was. It just, there was something, we always said, I don't know. Back in those days, we had actual milkmen who would deliver the milk, and maybe. But he was literally, I think, about 14 or 15 months old when he got pneumonia, and maybe not even that old. And he had to go to the hospital, and we didn't understand why the baby was gone. Where did the baby go? Where did the baby go? And I remember my dad driving me, and this was Broward General Hospital, where my father had been born and where I had been born. And we couldn't go in. There was a fear. This was, obviously the dark ages. There was some fear of infection. So all we could do, my dad could drive around to the side of the hospital, and he found the window of the room where my mother was staying with my brother, and he honked or something, and so she held up this very large, and I don't want to say robust baby, and mouthed the words, "He's all right, he's going to be okay," and Rob was flailing away, and that was... So then if you flash forward about 50 years, Rob and I are having a conversation. Now our conversations have turned to other things where he's saying to me, "What's the deal with my hairline?" He said, "You're 6 years older than me. Why the difference?" And we had many phone conversations on the hairline issue, which I could not explain. And I said, "You have to ask Mom. We don't know." Rob was when Rob believed in something, and whether it was somebody who was sitting in prison who was innocent, or somebody who was homeless and needed a voice that he was never going to get except in a newspaper column or in the pages of a newspaper, he was tireless, and he would not back down, and he would stay with the story, he would stay with the cause. He was remarkable in that way, and this goes back to a childhood incident. Again, we had, when we were growing up, one of the worst dogs ever. He was lovely, we all loved him, but he lived, all I'm going to say is he lived to the age of 16, and he was never housebroken, and refused to be. And then he would do sadistic things around the house. And my mother had low tolerance for having valuable things disappear. He would knock over the garbage and drag the garbage into my mother's bedroom and spread it around in a malicious, not a stupid dog, just a malicious. And we all loved him, but Rob was a tireless, Schultz was the dog's name, and Rob was a tireless advocate.